It's time now for the Success is Subjective podcast. Here is your host and therapeutic consultant for young adults only, Joanna Lilley.
Hi, and welcome to the show. I know the anxiety that comes from watching a loved one struggle with a nonlinear path. This podcast was created to fight back against the narrow picture of success painted by social media. Each week, we share authentic stories from people who changed course, failed, and ultimately found their own definition of success. These are the stories you need to hear to prove that changing your mind is common, and you don't have to have it all figured out at 18. If you're a parent or a young adult looking for a little proof, you're home. Now let's get into today's episode. If you'd like to explore how I can help your young adult, schedule a free consultation through my website link in the show notes. Today, my guests are Rick and Clancy Denton. Rick and Clancy are empty nesters, embracing what's next with a blend of nostalgia, curiosity, humor, and a shared sense of adventure. With their two young adult kids out of the house, they've reconnected as a couple and are leaning fully into this vibrant season of life. It's unusual for me to have two guests on the show at once, but Rick and Clancy were a package, and you are not going to regret listening to their stories. Let's not wait any longer. Here's Rick and Clancy. All right, Rick and Clancy, I'm excited to have you on the show. Thanks for being here.
Yeah, thank you for having us. We're very excited.
For anybody that's listening, normally you know that I do these as individual interviews. Maybe back in the beginning, like somewhere in the first 25 episodes, I might have pretended like I knew what I was doing, having two people, but I've since mastered what it means to direct more than one person kind of talking. And so all that is to say, this episode is going to be longer than normal because we've got two guests, which I'm very excited about, but we want to make sure we give them both ample time to share their story. So let's dive in, because here we are going right off the cuff. Why don't you both tell us, where did you each grow up? And then what were you individually, the message that you were receiving about what you're supposed to do after you graduate from high school?
So I was born in Arkansas. We quickly moved to Texas. My father worked for JCPenney, so we moved around quite a bit. It seemed like pretty much every 6 years I was moving. So I moved in second grade, eighth grade, and then the middle of my sophomore year of high school, which that was not a lot of fun. So luckily that has helped me be able to adapt pretty easily to different situations. But, I don't remember my parents being like, you have to go to college. College is it. I don't think I ever thought there was another path. They both went to college, which for their age was not everyone. But yeah, I don't think there was ever anything else presented to me. I think I just always thought you graduate from high school and you go to college.
Yeah. So my conscious part of my growing up was all Austin, Texas. I didn't move after age 5. There were a couple of stops before that, but I have almost no recollection of those. In essentially the same house the entire time that I was there in Austin. My father was a physician. My mother was a nurse by training. When I became kind of aware of life and the memories, she had morphed into a blend of stay-at-home mom / kind of office manager for my dad's practice. And I don't recall having any other path even discussed. It just wasn't even a conversation other than going to college. And I think some of it was looking at my parents and what they did. My dad was a physician, so there was plenty of education and path that went associated with that. My mom was a nurse. There was a lot of education path with that. And then when I was in high school, my mom got her MBA while I was in high school, to the point that we actually graduated. I graduated from high school. She graduated with her MBA from the University of Texas the same year that I did. So we've got those great pictures of her in her gown and me in mine. So I never felt pressure. I just don't know that I even considered any other options.
Yeah. Okay, so I'm hearing that from both of you. Okay, so now the follow-up then question becomes like, well, what did you end up doing, right? Did you end up going to a school? How did that play out? Because this is starting to really like build the foundation for, here are these unspoken, kind of, I don't want to say expectations, but just kind of like unspoken values. And how did it end up playing out? Because when we're talking about emerging adults too, we're also talking about identity formation. So just because, we're looking at our parents to go, okay, what did they do? Maybe we're the apple that doesn't fall far from the tree, or maybe we are. Maybe we're the apple that like ends up in another country. But regardless, now that we kind of have that foundation for both of you, where did it end up taking you?
So I applied to one college, and it was the school that my older brother attended. And I don't want to say my parents did me a disservice, but I just didn't know there were that many options out there. Now, my plan was to be a nurse. And so at that time, there were only a few colleges in Texas that had a nursing program. So I applied to Baylor, I got into Baylor. I don't know now. My grades weren't bad, but I also went to a Plano Senior High. If anyone listening knows, that is a huge, huge school. You kind of get lost unless you have something that you are really interested in. And I started going down the medical path there. And so, I don't know if my grades would have gotten me into Baylor now, but I did. And I just kind of just followed along in my brother's footsteps because I didn't know what else was out there. So his story is totally different.
Well, the neighborhood I grew up in, though, is similar. So our schools were different. I went to a school that was much smaller, not a small high school by any means. My graduating class was 300. It wasn't 3 or 30.
Mine was 1,500.
So my school was the size of her graduating class, but it was still a sizable school. I grew up in an affluent neighborhood in Austin that I think it was everyone just kind of did that. And so when it came time to apply for colleges, everyone was taking the SAT. Everyone was doing all the things that they needed to do to be able to get into college. I don't remember the exact count. I applied to probably 8 or 9 different schools. And some of them I didn't know anything about. I opened up U.S. News and World Reports and just went, that one's in the South. Let's try that. Knowing that because of grades, I was able to get into UT. So I always had UT as kind of the safety school. What's interesting in today's world, I don't know that I could have gotten into UT, and Lord knows there's no way I could have gotten into the school that I got into now, which is Duke. And once I got into what was probably the highest sort of ranked school, if you will, on my list, I was going to go there because it was the best school. I think it'd take a lot of unpacking to figure out why that mattered to me so much. It probably was a little bit of, look, peers and classmates, I've gone to Duke, which now looking back is somewhat silly. I imagine that a good reason why I chose there was just because it was ranked the way it was.
Well, a little sidebar, I'm like over here, like very much cheesing and like trying to withhold my like geekiness that relates to the decisions, like the decision-making process for why colleges are chosen by young adults. And oftentimes, there's literally a book written about it, and it just like really labels like one of them is just, I think one of the most common is to get as far away from home as possible. And I think the other one too is also just like looking at the list. Here's the ranking. So you're not far off, Rick, in terms of your decision-making process.
I'm sure that an element of it was the insecurity that I felt at that time. I never was in the cool kid crowd. I wasn't ever in the unpopular. I was kind of the standard middle, but I know internally I felt, without acknowledging it then, a lot of insecurity. And so I imagine this is a way to kind of boost my ego in that regard. I loved my family. I had no desire to necessarily depart, but I did know that I loved a sense of adventure. And so UT was in my hometown. Great school, but I had no interest in staying in my hometown. So I wasn't getting away from family as much. It was just finding a fun 4-year adventure that I would then know. I had a reasonable expectation that I'd be returning back home-ish.
Yeah. And I think both of our schools being private schools, I do think, I've had some pride that, I'm going to a private school. I think that played into it a little bit, along with the fact that I just figured that's where I was going to go.
So Clancy, what was college like for you? And then kind of what ended up playing out in that like next iteration? Let me also say too, sometimes I lead and I'm like, I can't make assumptions. I really don't want to like paint this path of like, you went to school and you graduated in 4 years and then what came next? It's like, hold on, I got to back up the bus. I want to make sure that you are able to just share every part of the story that existed. And I'm not setting you up for some sort of weird interaction where you're like, actually, hold on, Joanna, I didn't finish. And here's what happened. So fill us in.
So the way that Baylor does their program is you do 2 years in Waco and then 2 years back in Dallas at the nursing school. If that would not have been the case, I probably would have transferred. It was not my cup of tea. I had grown up in a Baptist home. You know, my parents were not super strict with anything, but it was a little bit suffocating for me there. And I kind of went off the deep end a little bit with the partying and that kind of thing in my sophomore year, which I loved. I had a great time.
Yeah, I love the subtleness with which you were saying this. Yeah.
It's probably really
not that
really
it's Tuesday night and I'm driving to Austin every week. You know, the
it's
real
really
stories.
Probably the only thing, yes, that kept me there. And then when I got back to Dallas, I was like, oh, thank God, I'm back in Dallas. You know, and I continued down the path of probably doing more partying than I did studying. So it took me a little longer to graduate. I graduated a semester late. Amongst all that, we met because he graduated a year earlier than me. And so one of my friends at school introduced us. So then I was even focused on, I have a boyfriend. This is my first like serious boyfriend. And so I would say school, I finished, I did fine, but took a little bit of a back seat to, at that point, I think I was like, okay, I'd already had it. We're going to get married. I'm going to be a mom. You know, I'll work if I want to work. But, you know, I was looking at it like, all right.
I don't remember those conversations in the dating days.
Well, I probably didn't tell you that. So my path was a little bit, it had some different curves and to it to get out, but I did graduate. So, and you were at my graduation.
I was at your graduation.
Yes, you were.
I absolutely was. Yeah, Baylor certainly has that. Back then,
yeah.
You know, Baylor now is not Baylor then. You know, the cliched MRS degree, it was what a lot of folks had talked about there. So, you being different, having the I want to get out of there, you probably escaped some of that. I know. So when I went to Duke, the first semester was actually a little bit rough and awesome for me at the same time. It was the first time that I'd gotten slapped in the face of, oh crap, I have to study.
Yeah.
Like these, and I'd taken some AP tests that got me elevated in engineering calculus, which, good Lord, I had no business being in that. I'm not a math guy. And so I'm seeing grades and marks that are worse than I'd ever had in any of my career before. I was a little bit homesick as well. I enjoyed the adventure. I was a little bit homesick, even to the point that I had an entire transfer application filled out for, of all places, Baylor, oddly enough, which that never got sent in. I had a good group of friends that I'd met. We were in the freshman dorm together. It was a freshman dorm that was actually technically condemned, and the school had convinced the city to keep it open one more year. So there's sort of a little bit of a trauma bonding that happened with all the folks that were in that dorm together. And these are still some very close friends of mine that I met that year. So I had these great relationships while being homesick, while getting kicked in the balls with my grades. And then I met a girl, and that sort of helped me think, all right, okay, Duke is okay. I won't transfer. I came home for Thanksgiving, and that was fun. I got all connected to home. But when I came home for Christmas, that first semester, suddenly home didn't feel as home anymore. School felt like home. Mm-hmm. And that appetite to get back to, air quote here, home. And then I'd catch myself realizing, wait, I am home. And so that mental transition right there, I was able to get into the classes that I belonged in, like poli-sci.
Yeah, you changed your major.
And well, I didn't have a major then, but I got away from some of those math and STEM kind of classes. That's not how my brain works.
Yeah.
Focused heavily on international classes. We'd always grown up traveling with my family, so getting to focus on international, all that. So the college experience ended up turning in a great way with these great relationships, these great friends, these great experiences. Duke had won the national championship my freshman year of all things. And so there was just this wonderful kind of embedded, cliched college experience. And yeah, classes were hard. I was learning things, but I won't say that the things I was learning necessarily prepared me for what I'd be doing post-college. So I was really enjoying what I was doing. But then I still, and Clancy and I have talked about this, spring to me is not a season of rebirth. It's a season of melancholy because I associate it with the end of a school year. And it was really melancholy, that end of junior, end of senior year, when you started to realize this thing is about to end.
Yeah.
And that was a very disorienting period, all the while still enjoying where you were. But what was next was, well, a little bit frightening or just unclear.
I had the total opposite. I was like, thank God this is about to end. I was
He's grieving and you're celebrating.
Yeah. But I had found my people, like, we had our group established in Dallas at that point. I mean, pretty much at that point we were together. Yeah. And so, I was ready to be done with school and just have fun as an adult.
And I think, not to belabor it too much, I did then somehow I took a couple summer jobs in the OR when I was back home and fell back in love with medicine. So started taking some of those biology and organic chemistry, and then was reminded with the bad grades why I was not supposed to go down that path. Well, then that was disorienting as well, because all I had modeled for me was a physician father, a nurse mom, office manager, stay-at-home mom, MBA mom. So I didn't know, in spite of what I just said about MBA, I didn't know anything other than that. And that door was closed for me. So that became disorienting for sure.
So what did you end up doing, right? At this point, now I'm hearing that, like, all right, we're back in Dallas, right? Now it sounds like there's a lot of ambiguity about the path, right? The path. And Clancy, that kind of goes back to your vision, unspoken or not, where you're like, I'm going to be a mom. I'm going to raise some kids. So, like, I imagine at some point in this process, that's kind of like maybe on the horizon or in the works. So I'm just kind of curious where this next chapter, how it started to pan out.
Yeah. So I graduated and started working at the hospital, and we'd been dating at that point for a little while. And I could not get past this test that I had to get past. I took it twice and I was like, I'm done. I gave up. I was like, I'm out. I'll just figure out something else to do. I went and worked privately for a family, nursing. And one day I was driving over there and I heard an ad on the radio to become a flight attendant. I was like, we both really love to travel. I had started doing some of that in high school and in college. And so I was like, that's interesting. So I called him and he was like, go for it. So I went and they hired me that day to come into the new class. And so, so I was a flight attendant until I was 8 months pregnant with our son. So, and that was, good, probably 3-4 years, 3 years.
Yeah, something like that.
So that was my next step. And I loved it. It was great. And it's crazy how things just worked out, because Rick at that time, I know he'll get into it, but he was in consulting. Well, he ended up being on projects I got based up in Baltimore, and he was on a project to where I could just fly back and forth to Boston to be with him during my days off. So yeah, that was the right path at that right time.
It became the right path at that time. Yeah, I mentioned the lack of knowledge of what to do. At Duke, you pretty much, I'm grossly simplifying this, but at the time you had 4 career choices too. You went into law, you went into medicine, you went into investment banking, or you went into business consulting, management consulting. And I didn't know. And I certainly wasn't going to be in law. I certainly wouldn't be in medicine. And I didn't get hired by anybody, by the investment banks, thank God, looking back. And so I picked up a gig with Anderson Consulting, which is now called Accenture. I didn't know what, I mean, I'm not exaggerating when I say that when we had our first meeting as a little start group there in Dallas, everyone was asked to go around the table, say your name, what school you went to, and which group you had been hired into. I didn't know what group I'd been hired into. So thankfully, out of the, let's say 10 of us, I think I was about the 8th or 9th to answer. I discreetly sort of leaned down, pulled my offer letter out of my bag and looked in my lap to see which group that I'd been a part of. Like, I had no clue what I was doing. And I think that proved to be somewhat true throughout consulting. I worked there for a couple years. It didn't pan out. Went to another consulting firm. Then I did a lot of other .coms and startups and all of that. And I mean, this is a big fast forward, but I think it took me a long time to realize that the corporate world just isn't for me, and entrepreneurship is. That's a later element of the story. All the while talking about the story part of it, I think it had to be God ordained that I ended up there because of what Clancy was talking about. I will say that the consulting world provided the opportunity for us to have phenomenal dates. So we're building these great connections. It provided miles and points for us to take great trips together. And because of that project that I was on, Clancy didn't talk about it, but there was a moment when she chose to go to the Baltimore base. And it was a little bit.
That was not my choice. I got forced there.
Yeah.
I could have left there after, but yes.
There was a little bit of, hey, Rick, Fisher cut bait here, man. Yeah. I'm going to go live my life because apparently you aren't moving forward in the way that she had envisioned. And
well, because we had been together for 3 years at that point.
Yeah. Yeah. And so her move to Baltimore kind of woke me out of my immature, hey, this is a really good, solid relationship. I wasn't some flaky guy, but okay, if we're really going to be a committed couple, let's be a committed couple. And I think that move to Baltimore really opened my eyes. There was a specific trip to Italy that I took with my family. And I remember sitting there thinking, there's no one that I'd rather spend this view, this meal, this experience with than the woman who isn't here with me. I want that to be for the rest of my life. That's when I knew that that Clancy was the one that I wanted to marry. All of that wove together in a bit of a casserole to realize that the things that didn't necessarily make sense and the disorientation all came together, allowing Clancy and me to realize we are the ones for each other. Let's get married. Let's do this thing. Let's live life together.
I just got goosebumps. I love that story. Okay. I'm probably going to listen to that part over and just be like, gosh, true love really does exist.
Well, wait till we get to talking about the part when we discover we're about to be empty nesters. Then you'll get some goosebumps with your tears.
Okay. So now that you've committed, you're in this, you're obviously kind of now starting to bounce around a little bit with the career path. And you kind of alluded to it, Rick, where you're like, at some point, I'm going to get to the point where I'm talking about being an entrepreneur. So where did the path take us? Because in Clancy, you were also saying hey, I really enjoyed being a flight attendant all the way up until I was about 8 months pregnant with your son. So with the birth of your son, what was that next chapter like for both of you?
Yeah. So we had pretty much already set that, and we were fortunate enough to be able to, I would stay home, until the kids reached a certain age. That's how we both had moms that worked previously, but then were there when we were, at the young ages of life. And so, yes, so I worked up till I was about 8 months pregnant with Tanner. And then we had Tanner. We were living in Houston at the time. And yeah, I just got to do all the mom things, joined all the groups and it was fun. I really loved that part of our life. I loved our time in Houston. It was not long, but I really enjoyed that. And then, we got pregnant with our daughter while we were still there, but then moved, which that's our story, but a lot of that is your story. But yeah, so I was very happy to be able to almost just not think about oh, I have to work or I have to find something that I can do now that is, close to home. But it was nice to just have that freedom to just be there with the kids until, I did that up until our youngest was in her last year of preschool. And then I pivoted into a new career of being a fitness instructor. And that's what I did for the last 15 years before I retired. And really looking back on it, I probably should have just not gone to college and just started with that, because I love health and fitness. That's always been a thing that I started really getting into when I went to college. So, I probably could have saved my parents a lot of money and just gone.
Well, I hope they don't listen to this part of the episode.
I will, but I do. I loved it. That was my favorite thing that I did, and I still, if someone called me to come teach a class, yes, I'd probably go do it now, even though I'm retired. But yeah, so that was kind of what I did throughout our marriage up until we decided to do stuff together. We had a lot of different paths along the way as a couple.
Clancy mentions 3 roles that she had, and there's a theme that's woven through all of those, and it's care for others. Nursing, you're caring for someone, a flight attendant, you're caring for someone's comfort, their safety, and their experience, and then certainly a fitness instructor, care for others. So when people hear it, they hear a disjointedness, but when you think of that thread that weaves through it, it makes a lot of sense. Mine, before I went independent, I had 11 job changes before I decided to go out on my own. Part of why I decided to go out on my own is because I realized, well, the W-2 is a lot less secure than if I go out and hunt my own business. And when I say that I had 11 job changes, one of those was by choice. The rest were either companies .coms, right? I showed up to work one day and they said, hey, y'all can stay, but we can't pay you. Bye. So one was, my first one was definitely a culture mismatch. That was a place that I didn't belong, and they probably shouldn't have hired me. The rest were layoffs and that sort of aspect of it. It was incredibly disruptive to our family from a career perspective. There were moments of wonderful economic highs, and then there were moments where we had long family, deep discussions on whether we could afford the $60 play school slide for Tanner so that he had something to do in the house in Houston.
And that was the best purchase ever.
Yeah.
Those $60 were well spent.
We stressed about that $60 slide, but it was a wise choice. So the career part was incredibly unstable. The relationship part, for the most part, was very stable. We had, like many married couples, we had some ups and some downs, but for the most part, solidly committed to each other. Had a couple of moments where we used travel as the save for marriage is too strong of a word, because I don't think the marriage was going to fail, but probably without action it would have been. But using trips to reconnect and discover who we were as a couple and all of that. All the couple part of it was just, and the family and the kids, we kind of lucked out. We didn't have a lot of major stressors with the kids. Of course, every kid does something knuckleheaded that you have to deal with. It was really that career thread that just introduced a lot of stress to us, to the point that it was like, you know what? We're taking control of this. And after it was 2017, after a great run at Capital One, it was just there wasn't the right next opportunity, exited and started my own business. Did that for about 7 years. And then now, this could be a whole nother episode. Now, Clancy and I are in business together, retiring the consulting business and exclusively in the podcast media business right now.
Well, and let's talk about that, because for those that are only listening to the audio, they can't see this beautiful background that I get to as we're having this conversation. So tell us, what are the two of you doing?
So Rick had a business podcast for years, since 2021.
Since 21, yeah.
And I never pictured myself doing anything like this, but I knew he was really, really enjoying it. And when our youngest one was getting ready to go off to school, this was her spring semester, senior year, I was like, there's just really not a lot out there. And I also started freaking out a little bit. Just, we were together for many years before we had kids. Best friends, so much fun. We started off actually as friends before we started dating. But I am very close to my kids, to both of them. We both are. And so I just wasn't sure. And I literally looked at him one night after we had been out and I said, what if I don't like us when she's gone? And I know that hurt him, and I didn't mean for it to necessarily hurt him, but it was just something that I had been thinking about. And again, there I was like, there's no books out there about empty nesting. It goes all the way through parenthood and getting them into college. And then it's like, well, then what do you do? So one day in the shower, I said, you know what? I'll ask him if he wants to start a podcast. We could just use it as something to keep us connected. And if we have some stories to share with people, and he was fully on board. And so, yeah, we really started probably that, I guess, right out. Did we start it before she graduated? We didn't start, but we started planning
before she left.
But we started planning the podcast pretty much that whole summer. So it actually kind of gave us something to do while I'm also packing IKEA bags and all that kind of stuff. We transformed the kids' playroom into our studio. And so, yeah, that's how the Loud Quiet was born. And we're in season 3 right now.
Yeah. Yeah, Clancy, that moment when I can still kind of feel it because I was driving, so I couldn't see it, but I could feel it, her turning there and saying that. And even though the words she said are the words that she said, but my ears heard, what if I don't like you anymore after she leaves? And that was one of the most crystallizing, fear-creating, just nausea-inducing feelings that I had experienced inside of our marriage. What's great is what Clancy said, though, is that then we turn that into an intentional choice of what can we do to stay connected? Not, I don't like you, but rather, what if I don't? And therefore, what can we do to make sure that we stay connected? And I think it was absolutely God ordained. I also, like light bulb from heaven when she said the podcast thing. I think she could have said, hey, do you want to do cattle ranching together? And I would have said, yes, just as a way to stay together. But I'm very glad that she chose podcasting as the idea that came to her in the shower, because I think we'd suck as cattle ranchers.
Yeah. And you still had your consulting business, and I was still I worked up until just last November is when I retired. So, and now we're both just fully into this. So,
I've shut down the consulting business, and that's created a whole set of challenges and excitements and discoveries about each other that you think you know how to communicate well as a couple. And I think we do. Everybody can improve. I think we do a good job of it. But when you also are a couple and business partners, it totally changes the communication paradigm. And I think we're still continuing to figure that out. For sure.
And when he started his consulting business, I said, you are going to get an office somewhere because this is my domain here. And so
I'll translate that. Get out of my house. I don't care where, but go away.
Yeah. But now, and he kept that office for a little while. And then we were like, why are we paying for rent for an office when, we could choose any of the rooms in this house. And so, yes, we converted our downstairs office into, both of us office out of there now. So it's been good. And it's really, I loved creative writing and that kind of thing when I was younger. And even into college, I loved my English classes that I took. And so it's really awakened in me that creativity again. And I think that is one thing that I'm just really, really loving about being in this space.
Yeah.
So I have to ask this question, and it's going to be a doozy, but I know that you can both handle it. Having heard both of your separate individual journeys, and then obviously like how it's converged at this point into what it is that you're doing right in this exact moment, do you see yourself as successful?
I do. I probably view my success based on our happiness, my kids are great. I think that's probably what I view. But like I said, I'm really loving this time of our life. I mean, this stage of life has just really been rewarding. There's been some sad parts, but it's really, I think, changed even our relationship to be more successful, I think, than it has been in certainly in certain times. And I would say even it's made us closer. And so, yeah, I mean, I feel successful. And, I don't know that there were really times in my life that I didn't feel successful. I tend to be it's good, yay, that kind of thing. I think the blow that I had out of nursing school was probably one of my lower points, but I had a great relationship. I knew that I was going to be fine and that it was going to be okay. I had supportive parents, so I think, yes, my answer would be yes. I feel very successful now.
Yeah. It's hard to add anything to what Clancy said there. So, but I'll say, yes, Your Honor, I feel incredibly successful. And it's across multiple domains. It is looking at our kids and how they are thriving and what they're doing. And not just, I'll add kind of to the thriving, also when they aren't thriving, when they get knocked back a bit, because each of them have had kind of knockback moments, watching them be able to bounce back and take that forward. Love seeing that. So I feel like a success as a parent there. I feel like a success as a husband because we're still together. Like there's just the metric of we are still married. So therefore on the dashboard of green, yellow, red, it's green, right? Can we be better as a couple? Of course. Are there days that suck? Yes. It's overall though, because of the paths that were really messy, like a big old bowl of spaghetti coming out into the end of what we're experiencing now, I feel like we're absolutely thriving and as a success. On the economic front, it's almost I'd put like a TBD in the sense, not overall economics. Actually, thank God we've done the right things to put us in a position to do what it is. The business is growing. Yeah. And so a lot of times people talk about business success. That's still a TBD indicator. And yet I still can answer the way that I answered, because to me, that's not the success that defines what I think is success. Great if the business succeeds. I care a lot more about this relationship right here than I care about any profit and loss statement. And I know that what Clancy and I have is a success.
Okay, so now I'm going to follow it up, because a lot of your sharing of your personal stories has also really either hinted at or outright talked about parenting, and hence your podcast, Your Empty Nesters. So we're talking about, you have launched, right, quote unquote, young adults into the world. And Rick, I love how you just talked about like, hey, even when I watch my kids have moments where like they need to bounce back, because that's normal, right? We have those. And then I reflect back on both of your experiences too, and like wearing different types of job hats. My question, and this is long-winded, so thanks for like hanging in there with me, is because of your own experiences with different careers or like, different moves, has that also changed your vision for how you maybe parented, what quote unquote success needs to look like for your young adults? And I'm asking this too. So here's the question mark at the end of that. The reason why I'm asking is because this audience that listens to this podcast is looking for validation. They're looking for acceptance. They're looking for some sense of normalcy in a world that sometimes feels like, what is normal nowadays? But a lot of that is that the old visions of you go to college, you have a career, and you stick with it for forever, right? Is just, that hasn't been the norm for a really long time. So I say all that. Obviously, both of your personal experiences reflects that as well. So based on your own journeys, has that redefined the lens that you use in kind of parenting your now adult children into what success needs to look like for them?
Oh, I have an emphatic yes there. I mean, my neck is sore from nodding while you were asking that question. The 1950s thought of go to college, get job, work hard, get retirement ring, and go sit on a beach somewhere is crap. That simply does not exist. The way the U.S. corporations are set up right now, you cannot expect to build a stable career through that. You can't expect that going to a college will get you entrance into one of those theoretical careers. And so that's like, I'll say it again, it's crap to think that that is the path forward. Some have done it. And so knowing that, having been burned by that, having had the 11 job changes, boy, I can feel my blood pressure getting up here. Having had those job changes helps me to say to my kids, you do whatever your path is. Yep. Do not let it be prescribed by anyone else. Now, yeah, we just mentioned our son's in law school. Well, he's doing kind of one of those classic paths, but that was his choice, his way. He didn't necessarily get into the firms that he necessarily wanted or anything like that. He's in great firms, but he's learning that his path is not necessarily as exactly straight line as he expected. And I hope he feels this, that he's getting great support from us, because we know there is no such thing as linear. Ooh, I got to get off this soapbox. Oh,
well, give me a fan. I will say, like, Tanner, when this child was 3, I told Rick, and I probably told him too, I think you're going to be a lawyer, just because he could argue so logically and not get emotional. I never knew, but he actually, our neighbor that we carpooled with, she said, oh, he told me in kindergarten that he was going to go to law school. And I was like, okay, you know, I didn't know that until just a couple of years ago. We never said to our kids, you are going to college. There's no other option. You're going to college. We never said that to them. Like Rick said, we always have told them, we want you to do something that you love. And so, because it took us a while to get to that stage in our lives of doing the things that we loved. I don't think either one of them, though, that was never a thought that they weren't going to go to college, but we certainly did not force that down their throats. You know, Tanner had his list of 11 schools that we visited. Yes, 11. It was a lot. And you know, he had his path very much planned. Tegan, little different. She had some mental health struggles in high school. Nothing major that, you know, her counselor helped her through. She was almost like me. She wanted to apply to one school. And I said, you know what? I did suggest, let's open it up to maybe
just a little wider.
I said, how about 4? So we picked 4. And actually the one that she was dead set on, she didn't end up going to. And so
because she didn't want to.
Right. Like because she didn't want to. Yeah. She got into all the ones that she applied to. And so, you know, but seeing her when we got to the campus visiting that she ended up going to, University of Arizona, she fell in love with it. When she thought all along, nope, I'm going to CU Boulder. And then it switched, and it's been the perfect place for her. Just like Tanner's college choice. Yeah. We would have never chosen it for him because
we would have been anti.
Yeah, when he applied, Rick was like, you're not going there. He went to Arizona State. So both of our kids ended up in Arizona. We have no ties to Arizona, which is another weird thing. But he got into the honors college, which is a very small group, and it was the absolute right fit for him. It may not have been on our barometer of, you know, going to Duke, going to Baylor. We're like, really, Arizona State? But I mean, it was the perfect fit for him.
It taught us a lesson.
Yes, it did. Totally.
Okay. Hey, smug couple. Don't be like that.
Yes.
And I think what we learned through our kids, but also watching our kids, and it could be because they saw us having to bounce back from all the career changes and all that sort of stuff, is don't assume that any path that you have planned for yourself is the path that you will go forward on. Yeah. You know, there's that kind of phrase, cliche, you know, man plans, God laughs. And so I think there's an element of he's going to direct whatever the path is for our kids. You know, our daughter wants to be a school counselor.
Yeah.
There could be some parents that be like, oh man, you're not going to make any money with that. you're right. You're not going to make any money with that, but she's going to make an impact. She's going to do something that she loves. She's going to do something that is great for her. Yep. And you mentioned in the asking of the question that you have an audience that's looking for validation. I think the validation, the stories of your audience they probably aren't going to match ours because we have our story and that person has their story and that person has their story. And I think that's the validation is life is so unpredictable that it'll just go in the way that it goes and kind of flow with it. And that's what we've had to learn. And it seems that our kids have learned that as well.
And I think, it's hard sometimes when you're in that moment of, oh, my kid's making the wrong decision, or, oh, they're not headed down the right path. That is so incredibly hard as a parent. And once you get to the other side of it, then you can see, okay, this was sometimes supposed to happen this way. But I know that's so hard to still be that support and encouragement and not want to step in and fix, especially when they're at this age, of our kids. And so I would just say, we've done a lot of praying at certain times. And if prayer is not your thing, just whatever you can do to I would say just listen to your kids, listen to what they're going through. I think a lot of times they just want to know that you're there listening instead of trying to fix everything and get them back on the path that you think they should be on. Obviously my path was probably not what my parents thought would be my path. You're, same for you, but look at where we've ended up and,
Yeah, podcast host wasn't on anybody's bingo card.
No, probably not.
Well, and now it's my turn to shake my head emphatically based on what you were just saying at the end, Clancy. I think I appreciate both of you sharing your personal stories as a couple, parenting stories, as well as kind of imparting the advice. And to your point, Rick, I think that the validation that people are seeking is that every single person is different. But even those subtle, even the comment you made about here we were parents going Arizona State, I can't tell you. And it's no knock at Arizona State. I've got clients who are there.
Hey, it's great. We love it.
It's a great school. Insert name of any school that you have some sort of impression about, and that, plug and play, same situation. So I appreciate both of you for taking time to not just share your stories, but also I love the work that you're doing right now, the shift, the work together, and the actual podcast itself, because you created something that didn't exist. So you filled a gap, and now that work is obviously shedding light on also validation for parents that are similarly empty nesters. And so I just love that. Before we wrap up, how can folks listen to the podcast, or how can they connect with you?
Yeah, so the best way is it's all at theloudquiet.com. There you've got all of the podcast information. You've got a place where you can sign up for the newsletter. We've got a free empty nester travel tips and gear guide there. We've got a book coming out early next year, and the best way to find out about that again is signing up there at theloudquiet.com. Everything you'd want to know about the show and the entire empty nest living ecosystem is there.
Perfect. Well, thank you both again for being a guest on the podcast. And for any parent that's listening, sign up for the newsletter, get connected, and listen in.
That's it for this week's Success is Subjective episode. We want to thank our guests for joining Joanna on the show this week and for being willing to share your journey. This podcast would not exist if it weren't for people such as yourself. Stay tuned for our next episode, where you can bet it'll be another amazing human sharing their personal story with the world. Make sure you check out the show notes, where you will find contact information, website details, and all social media for our guest. If you're interested in being a guest on the podcast, you can email Joanna at lillyconsulting.com. Be sure to check out the lillyconsulting.com website for additional resources outside of podcasting. Now, if you're listening to the show on Apple Podcasts, please subscribe. And while you're at it, feel free to leave a review. You can also download to listen to the Success is Subjective podcast on other popular podcast apps, such as Audible, Google Podcast, iHeartRadio, Spotify, Stitcher, and TuneIn Radio. Thanks again for listening in, and remember, there is no single path through life. Success is what you make it.